Hu Xijin, editor-in-chief of the Global Times, said in May, when Australia urged China to take responsibility for the spread of the Wuhan pneumonia. Australia is like a chewing gum that sticks on the sole of the shoes. Sometimes you have to find a stone to rub the chewing gum off. After that, China began to impose the sanctions on Australia. This included banning Australian beef imports, but it was failed, because that made Australia strengthen the Indo-Pacific ties to India and Japan as the strategy against China. Also, this Indo-Pacific ties was the reason why China can only act slow to retaliate against Australia. However, China slowly restarted these sanctions against Australia again, taking advantage of the nationwide turmoil in the US surrounding the presidential election. Last month, China urged Australia to reconsider its anti-China strategy. They announced 14 crimes Australia has committed to show how serious they are. Among those 14 crimes were the question about the true origin of the Wuhan pneumonia, the expulsion of the Huawei, and the support of Hong Kong, Taiwan, as well. But again this time, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison refused to give up, saying that due to trade difficulties, Australia's value and sovereignty would not change, instead putting even more pressure on China. And after that, China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian made an unacceptable diplomatic rude by posting one picture on Twitter. This composited photo of an Australian soldier holding a knife to the neck of an Afghan child. The United States, New Zealand, France, and Taiwan share the following positions. It is nonsense for a country's foreign ministry to officially provoke another countries with a composited photo. This is a provocation to all countries that have sent troops to Afghanistan. And the next day, the Australian Daily Telegraph responded to the provocation with its front page with a picture of Tiananmen Square in 1989 that China was trying to hide. This again raised the awareness of the problem that was shamed the CCP and made the world take notice about it. However, the CCP did not give up and again imposed more than 200% tariff on Australian wines to put pressure on Australia. But once again, unexpected thing has happened. All of a sudden, other countries began to start Australian wine drinking campaigns worldwide and due to support to Australia. The campaign was led by an IPAC from 19 member states, and their video with hashtags like Solidarity with Australia and Freedom Wine spread around the world. In Taiwan in particular, private companies, the governments, and even President Tsai Ing-wen have officially supported this campaign. Nathan Low, a Hong Kong Democrat who fled to the UK, also tweeted that even he doesn't drink himself, he will buy Australian wine. The US National Security Council also cheered Australia by saying, "We will serve Australian wine for dinner in the White House." Also, China's 7 banned items from Australia included wine and lobster, which turned out to be a good thing for the Australian before Christmas. Now lobster, which has always been expensive and difficult to obtain, can be bought at half price. And when Australians showed sympathy for the lobster sellers who suffered from the retaliation, consumption soared that even some markets were forced to limit the number of purchases per person. But China was not giving up trying to enforce the sanctions against Australia. After that, China began speaking out against the imports of Australian barley, dairy products, meat, wine, and even coal. However, these measures caused more damage in China. Importers in China, including coal-consuming power plants, are calling on the authorities to lift the ban on Australian coal imports. But the authorities are not listening. Even China's state-run media, Global Times, reports that the ban on coal imports should be eased somewhat. The Chinese authorities say that Australia will never be accepted in China as Australia rejects China's 5G infrastructure and participates in US plan to push China back. There are 2 types of coal. One is thermal, which is used to generate thermal electricity, and the other is metallurgical coal, which is used to make steel products. Australia provides half of the world's demand for thermal, and China banned the import of the Australian ironstone. At first, it was referred to as another sanction against Australia, but soon China's steel industry suffered immense damage. When it comes to coal, Japan is Australia's most sought-after customer, with China in second place, Korea in third place, and Taiwan in first place. In addition, India and Vietnam also import Australian coals, so it does not represent a great loss for Australia even if they cannot sell coals to China. Since the supply of coal from Australia has become scarce, China can only generate limited electricity because they can no longer operate the power plant properly, and thus China has only limited access to electricity. Chinese authorities issued notices of electricity shortage in Hunan and Inner Mongolia. As a result, the Chinese people began to criticize the authorities. Why do the authorities limit the transmission of electricity in winter? Everyone knows that summer is the season with the most electricity, and now we are in the winter. On December 12th, also there was notices of limited electricity from Zhejiang province. It has been announced that an office will only be allowed to use a heater if the temperature drops below 3 degrees Celsius, and if the room temperature exceeds 16 degrees Celsius, it is forbidden to use it. No elevator may be used below the third floor, and restaurants should not exceed 18 degrees. The heaters in the restaurant should also be switched off after cooking. This is the video shot in the office in Changsha City, Hunan Province. The blackout resulted in the elevator in the building shutting down. There have been complaints about this, as there were some people who have to go to the office on the 30th floor by using stairs, and even in the office they cannot even charge their cell phone. There was also another complaint, such as, if the office is no longer receiving power, why do we still have to go to the office? Even some restaurants cannot cook because the electricity has been switched off. Due to the lack of electricity, the power outage occurs every day at 3 p.m., causing a major disruption to work, and also all work being interrupted once in every 3 days, and that is causing great damage to Chinese export companies. Even schools have no electricity, so students are looking at their cell phones only. A sudden blackout in an apartment complex left the people trapped in an elevator. At night, all street lights were switched off so that drivers can only drive carefully only with their headlights. Hong Kong's media Mingpao gave a more pessimistic view of China's future with their article. Australian coal accounts for 57% of China's total imports. If China continues to stop importing coals, there will be a power shortage in other parts of the country. However, what causes the CCP more of a headache is the ironstone imports from Australia. If Australia counteracts China and stops exporting Australian ironstone entirely to China, the entire Chinese economy could be doomed. China imports 1 billion tons of ironstone from Australia from about 1.2 billion tons they source annually. That's more than 80%, so for China, it is impossible to find an alternative import source. With ironstone prices nearly doubling in recent years, Australia has been able to offset the losses from China's trade retaliation, and some Australian lawmakers have even insisted on imposing additional tariff on China, putting a huge burden on them. Against this backdrop, some experts in China have issued pessimistic analysis of the situation and have almost recommended to surrender and stop sanctions. If Australia stopped exporting ironstones for just months, China would lose up to $160 billion, and if China tries to subdue Australia despite these losses, it will take 5 years. How far will the Chinese government go to enforce its sanctions? And what are the consequences of this for the population and economy, who have suffered more than enough this year? What do you think about this? Thanks for watching. Your comments and likes. Be safe.